It was a warm Saturday afternoon in Atlanta when Aaliyah Robinson pulled into her driveway. Fresh from running errands, she felt the usual calm of returning to a space she'd built with hard work, determination, and years of sacrifice. Her charming two-story home, complete with a lush, private backyard, had always been her sanctuary. But that day something felt off. As she stepped out of her car, Aaliyah noticed a trail of wet footprints leading from her side gate to the front walkway. At first, she assumed they might belong to her landscapers, or perhaps a delivery person who had accidentally left them behind. Then she saw it. A damp towel carelessly tossed over the fence and a half-empty soda can resting on her favorite lounge chair. Her beautiful, crystal-clear pool, usually pristine, had an odd drop in its water level, and even her beloved pool float was out of place. Aaliyah asked aloud, "Who in the world is trespassing in my yard?" Later that day, while still reeling from her discovery, Aaliyah heard splashing coming from the backyard. She hurried to the back door and peered outside. What she saw made her heart race. A teenage boy was casually swimming in her pool, and a young girl sat at the edge, dipping her toes in the water. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" Aaliyah demanded. The teenagers, startled, stammered, We didn't think you'd mind, Ms. Robinson. We live just down the street." Aaliyah's voice sharpened as she replied, "Mind? This is my home, my pool. I never gave any of you permission to be here." Their eyes widened in panic, and they quickly scrambled back over the fence. Standing in her doorway with a towel in hand and her pulse pounding, Aaliyah couldn't understand how her peaceful haven had suddenly turned into a public playground. The next day, determined to address the issue directly, Aaliyah visited the home of the teenager's parents. She expected an apology and a promise to respect her property. Instead, she was met with indifference. "Oh, come on, Aaliyah," the mother said dismissively with a laugh. "They're just kids. It's hot out. What's the big deal?" The father added with a shrug, "Honestly, you're overreacting. They're just having a bit of fun." "This is my property," Aaliyah insisted. "I worked hard to build this home, and I don't appreciate it being treated like a community park." Her concerns were brushed off as oversensitivity, leaving her feeling undermined by the very people who lived around her. Not one to be ignored, Aaliyah installed security cameras around her property. For the first 2 weeks, it seemed to work. The mysterious footprints and stray towels ceased, and her backyard was quiet once more. For a brief moment, she thought, maybe I've finally made my point, but as the summer heat intensified, so did the misbehavior. On a blistering Saturday afternoon, Aaliyah pulled into her driveway again, only to be met with a sight that froze her in disbelief. Her side gate, always locked, was now slightly ajar. Rounding the back of her house, her heart sank. Her yard was filled with people. Neighbors, kids, even some adults, all lounging around with chairs, scattered beer bottles, and a makeshift table laden with snacks. A neighbor casually called out, "Hey Aaliyah, hope you don't mind. We just thought we'd cool off in your pool today." Aaliyah's voice rose sharply as she declared, "Mind? This is my space. Everyone, get out right now." Some guests paused mid-conversation while others exchanged bewildered looks. Among them was Sandra, a neighbor who had never really spoken to Aaliyah before. With a dismissive wave, Sandra said, "Oh, come on, Aaliyah. It's just a pool party. You weren't even home." Stepping forward, Aaliyah replied firmly, "No, Sandra. It's not just a pool. It's my home, my sanctuary, and my property. You don't pay my water bill or maintain my pool, so you have no right to treat it like a public water park." Her calm yet determined tone carried the weight of her frustration. In a moment of exasperation, she stormed over to the pool equipment box, snatched the remote, and shut off the pool filter. Grabbing the power cord for the speakers, she announced, "I'm calling the police." Within minutes, the impromptu gathering dissipated. Neighbors and partygoers, still murmuring under their breath, left as if nothing had happened. Aaliyah slammed the gate behind them and locked it, standing in her yard with hands on her hips and a storm of anger inside. Back inside her home, Aaliyah sat at her kitchen table, reviewing the security footage from earlier that day. The evidence was undeniable. People had made a mockery of her property, acting as though they were entitled to her hard-earned sanctuary. "I've tried talking, I've tried reasoning, and I've tried securing my home," she reflected. "But if respect isn't given freely, then it must be demanded." She knew that subtle deterrence was no longer enough. It was time to flip the script. Early the next morning, Aaliyah headed to a local hardware store. Determined to fortify her property, she purchased 2 heavy-duty locks, one for her side gate and one for her pool equipment box. The new locks were advertised as unbreakable, a promise that resonated with her need for peace and security. "From now on, my property isn't open season for freeloaders," she declared. But she wasn't stopping there. A friend in maintenance told her about a clever trick used by public pools to expose rule breakers. Intrigued, Aaliyah ordered a special chemical treatment, a harmless compound that would turn her pool water a bright, unmistakable green if someone tampered with it. She couldn't help but laugh at the thought. Imagine someone taking a dip and ending up looking like a radioactive alien. That'll teach them. Determined to send a clear message, Aaliyah visited a local sign shop and had a custom pool sign made. The very next morning, she mounted the sign on her fence. It read, "Pool chemically treated for unauthorized use. Exposure may cause rash, severe itching, or temporary skin discoloration." To complete the illusion, she placed an empty hazardous chemical container near her pool pump, a prop from a friend in maintenance. Her message was clear. That same hot afternoon, as Aaliyah sat by her window sipping iced tea, she watched intently. Soon enough, a pair of teenagers approached her fence. They paused, read the sign, and one leaned over to whisper to the other before they turned and walked away. Message received, Aaliyah thought quietly. Later that evening, she checked social media and found a post in the local neighborhood group. "FYI, it looks like Aaliyah put some weird chemical in her pool. They say it causes rashes and skin issues. Is it safe?" The post sparked concern, disbelief, and outrage. But one thing was clear. The free ride was over. A few days later, on a cool Thursday evening, there was a knock at Aaliyah's front door. Looking through the peephole, she recognized Sandra, the same neighbor from the chaotic pool party, standing there with arms crossed and an indignant look on her face. "Aaliyah, we need to talk," Sandra said. Aaliyah answered calmly, "All right, Sandra. What's on your mind?" Sandra continued, "People are saying you put some dangerous chemicals in your pool. What if a kid touches the water? Isn't that irresponsible?" After a brief pause, Aaliyah replied, "Sandra, listen. A few kids broke into my yard and splashed around like it was a free community pool. I warned them, I tried securing my home, and nothing changed. So I took measures. Measures meant solely to protect my property and send a message. My pool isn't a public amenity. It's mine." "But you don't even have kids, Aaliyah," Sandra countered. "How can you justify treating your pool like a chemical hazard?" Aaliyah laughed softly and said, "Not having kids doesn't mean I'm okay with everyone walking all over my space. I pay the bills, I maintain this house, and I deserve respect. You wouldn't appreciate it if someone used your car without permission. Why should my home be any different?" Sandra's frustration was evident as she finally said, "Enjoy being the mean neighbor, then, Aaliyah. Maybe you should try using your own driveway instead of mine." Aaliyah replied with a smile. The next morning, Aaliyah took one final step. She installed a motion-activated sprinkler system along her fence, a last automated line of defense. Any would-be trespasser daring to approach her property would now receive a sudden burst of cold water, a reminder that her boundaries were not to be crossed. "Sometimes you have to be a little creative to protect what's yours," she mused. And just like that, the days of uninvited pool parties, wandering towels, and casual disrespect came to an end. Aaliyah's decisive actions restored the peace and quiet of her home, a place she had fought so hard to preserve. In the weeks that followed, as the summer days passed quietly, Aaliyah took a moment to reflect. It wasn't about being petty or creating enemies. It was about asserting her rights. "I've learned that if you don't set clear boundaries, people will assume they can take advantage of you," she said. "I had to remind everyone that this is my sanctuary, built with my own hands and heart, While some might argue that her methods were extreme, Aaliyah knew the truth. When all other attempts, polite requests, security cameras, and extra locks, failed, she had to change the rules. Her home was not a free-for-all. As you listen to this story, consider your own boundaries. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you had to stand up for your space? How far would you go to protect what's yours? When we stand together and speak up, our voices matter. Aaliyah Robinson's journey is a powerful reminder that standing your ground is never easy. It may bring conflict, heated conversations, and moments of isolation. But in the end, reclaiming your space and demanding respect is a right we all deserve. Thank you for listening to Taking Back My Space. Remember, respect isn't given, it's earned. Sometimes all it takes is one bold step to change the rules. As Aaliyah declared, "From now on, my pool, my home, and my space belong to me. And I'm not about to let anyone forget that." Until next time, keep your boundaries strong and your spirit unbreakable.